All right, so I know what you're thinking, taxes again. Didn't we just deal with that whole finance bill thing?
You're not wrong to feel that way.
But this time, it's a bit different. This time we're diving deep into these business and tax laws, amendment bills.
And trust me, they're a lot more nuanced than that finance bill.
Okay, so let's take your money and more like, let's just change how things work.
Exactly. That's where these amendment bills come in. Remember that whole thing with the finance bill?
Yeah, trying to raise taxes on everything, fuel everyday stuff.
This time they're looking at regulating entire sectors, like digital credit, special economic zones, imports even.
So instead of just taking more money, they want to control how we spend our money, where businesses can even operate, what we can buy.
Yeah, you could say that. And that's exactly why we're here. To unpack these amendment bills, compare them to that finance bill you all fought against, and really figure out what this means for you, the average young Kenyan.
So no more beating around the bush.
Yeah.
Let's get into it. One thing I keep seeing online is all this buzz about digital credit regulations. People are saying it's good, that it'll protect borrowers from those predatory lenders.
Right.
But is there more to it than that?
There always is. On the surface, it sounds good. The bills want more transparency in digital lending. Cap those crazy interest rates and make sure companies aren't taking advantage of people just trying to get by.
So that's a win, right? Especially for young people who are more likely to need those quick loans.
It could be. But here's the catch. If they make the regulations too strict, it could backfire.
Wait, so we could end up with less access to credit?
Think about it. If it gets too risky or expensive for these lenders, they might just leave.
Okay, that doesn't sound good.
It's a balance.
Yeah.
The goal is to protect borrowers, but not completely shut down something that's helped a lot of people.
It's like walking a tightrope.
All right.
All right, moving on. Let's talk about these special economic zones. Supposed to bring in investment, create jobs, boost the economy.
Right.
But I'm a bit skeptical.
Oh.
Is this just a fancy way of giving tax breaks to big corporations?
A lot of people are asking that same question. The idea is you create these designated areas with tax incentives, streamline regulations, better infrastructure to attract businesses.
Okay, but what's the catch?
The catch is those zones could end up benefiting big corporations more than anyone else. Imagine foreign companies come in, set up shop in these zones, enjoy all the perks, and then send their profits out of the country.
So more profits for them, less for us.
That's a valid concern. And there's the environmental question, too. If the regulations aren't strict enough, we could end up with environmental damage and resource exploitation.
We've seen that before. It's not just about growth, it's about sustainable growth.
Exactly. And that leads us to another part of these amendment bills, the whole import declaration thing.
Oh, yeah.
They're saying they want to crack down on illegal imports, make sure everything coming in meets standards, protect local industries.
Okay, so supporting local businesses and keeping out harmful products. Who could argue with that?
But here's the thing. These stricter import regulations could lead to higher prices for consumers.
Wait, are you saying my avocado toast is going to get even more expensive?
Well, maybe not avocado toast specifically, but the point is stricter regulations can make prices go up, and that affects you directly.
So there are potential downsides to things that sound good at first.
Definitely.
What about this eco-levy on electronics? They say it's to promote recycling, but it feels like another way to make us pay more for our gadgets.
Yeah. The idea is this levy on imported electronics, like phones and computers, will generate funds for e-waste management, encourage responsible recycling.
Okay, but how does that actually work? We pay more, and in return we get, what? A cleaner environment.
It depends. How will they collect and manage this money? Will it actually go towards building proper e-waste recycling facilities, or will it just end up somewhere else?
Right, because we've heard those promises before, and they don't always pan out.
Yeah.
So what can we do? How do we make sure these bills actually benefit us and not just someone else?
That's where it gets interesting. We need to learn from what other countries have done, both the good and the bad.
Okay, so let's broaden our horizons a bit.
Let's look at Rwanda. They've got a really successful e-waste management system. Collection points all over the country, partnerships with private companies for recycling, even a dedicated e-waste processing facility.
Wow, that's impressive. Did it actually make a difference?
It did. They've significantly reduced e-waste in landfills, created jobs in recycling, and they're even extracting valuable materials from e-waste, turning trash into treasure.
So a win for the environment and the economy. That's encouraging. But what about a country that's struggled? An example of what not to do.
South Africa. They've had huge growth in digital lending just like Kenya, but they've also had predatory lending practices, high interest rates, aggressive debt collection.
Sounds familiar. What have they done to try to fix it?
They introduced the National Credit Act. It aims to protect consumers from shady lending. But implementing and enforcing it has been a nightmare.
So even with good intentions, things can go wrong.
Absolutely. It shows that just passing a law isn't enough. You need ways to enforce it, resources to monitor it, and the political will to make it work.
Right? Laws without enforcement are just words on paper. What about special economic zones? Any examples we can learn from, good or bad?
China's special economic zones are probably the most famous. They played a huge role in their economic transformation, attracted foreign investment, drove export growth.
I've heard about those,
Yeah.
but weren't there some downsides too?
There were. Some say those zones led to income inequality, environmental damage, and that they mainly benefited foreign companies.
So mixed bag as usual. Any other examples that will be helpful?
Let's look at Dubai. They've used special economic zones to diversify their economy beyond oil, focusing on things like logistics, finance, tourism.
Interesting. What's the takeaway from their approach?
They focused on creating a business-friendly environment, streamlined regulations, world-class infrastructure. They also targeted specific industries that aligned with their strengths and long-term goals.
Okay, so a clear vision and a targeted approach are crucial for making these zones work. What I'm hearing is there's no one-size-fits-all solution. We need to learn from both the good and the bad and adapt it to our context here.
Exactly, and that's what makes this whole conversation so important. These amendment bills are more than just abstract policies. They could really impact your lives.
And we need to make sure those impacts are positive. We've covered a lot, but this is just the beginning. Join us for part 2 as we keep breaking down these business and tax laws amendment bills and explore how they could shape your future, your wallet, and the future of Kenya. Welcome back to our deep dive into Kenya's business and tax laws amendment bills. We're picking up right where we left off, exploring how these proposed changes could shape your future, especially as young Kenyans who are already making your voices heard, demanding a better economic future for Kenya.
It's inspiring to see how engaged you are, and that's why it's so crucial to understand what these new bills actually say beyond the headlines and the political rhetoric.
Well, let's get past the buzzwords and break down these bills, clause by clause. What caught your eye as we were going through these documents?
One section that really stood out to me was the Amendment to the Central Bank Act, specifically the part about credit guarantee companies.
Okay, hold on a second. Credit guarantee companies. Can you remind us what those are again?
Sure. Basically, these companies act as a safety net for lenders, like banks. They provide guarantees on loans in case borrowers default.
So if someone doesn't pay back their loan, the credit guarantee company steps in and covers the loss for the bank.
Exactly. Think of it as insurance for lenders. Now, the amendment aims to give the central bank more power to supervise these companies, ensuring they operate responsibly and have enough capital to back up those guarantees.
Okay, so more oversight, more accountability. That sounds like a good thing, right? Less risk for the financial system.
In theory, yes. But we need to think about the potential unintended consequences. If the regulations become too burdensome, it could actually make it harder for new credit guarantee companies to enter the market.
So less competition. And what would that mean for borrowers? For businesses trying to access credit?
It could mean less access to credit, higher interest rates, and fewer options overall. It's a classic example of how regulation, while intended to protect the system, can sometimes have the opposite effect.
I'm sensing a theme here. It's all about striking that balance, right? Protecting consumers and the financial system without stifling innovation and access to credit.
Exactly. And that's a theme that runs throughout these amendment bills. It's a tightrope walk, and it's going to be interesting to see how the government navigates it.
Okay, so we've talked about digital credit, special economic zones, imports, and now these credit guarantee companies. What else is lurking in these amendment bills that we should be discussing?
There's a section that amends the Standards Act, and it's one that could have a major impact on your everyday lives.
Standards Act? That doesn't sound very exciting. What's that all about?
Don't be fooled by the name. This is about ensuring that the products and services you buy meet certain quality and safety standards. The amendments give the Kenya Bureau of Standards, or KEBS, more power to set and enforce these standards.
So they're basically the quality police.
Yeah.
Making sure we don't get ripped off with shoddy products.
Exactly. Think about everything from the food you eat, to the clothes you wear, to the electronics you use. KEBS is responsible for ensuring that these products are safe, reliable, and meet certain quality benchmarks.
Okay, I'm starting to see why this is important. No one wants to buy a phone that explodes or food that makes them sick.
Exactly. And it's not just about protecting consumers. These stricter standards can also help level the playing field for local businesses.
How so?
Think about it. If there are stricter standards in place, it becomes harder for cheap substandard imports to flood the market. This gives local businesses a better chance to compete.
Okay, that makes sense. Supporting local businesses is always a good thing. But what about the potential downsides? We've been talking a lot about unintended consequences, so I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this one.
The main concern is that these stricter standards could lead to higher prices. If businesses have to comply with more regulations, it costs them more money. And those costs are often passed on to consumers.
So we might end up paying more for everything.
It's possible. It's another example of that delicate balance we were talking about earlier. Finding that sweet spot between consumer protection, local industry support, and affordability.
Right, it's a complex equation.
Yeah.
All right, what else is on your radar?
There's a section that deals with amendments to the Kenya Accreditation Service Act. Now, this one gets a bit technical.
Okay, you lost me at Accreditation Service Act. Can you break this down for us? What is this and why should we care?
Think of it this way. The Kenya Accreditation Service, or KAS, is like a watchdog for quality assurance. They assess and accredit the labs and organizations that test products and services to make sure they meet those standards we were just talking about.
So it's like a quality check on the quality checkers.
Exactly. It's
Yeah.
an extra layer of assurance that the people testing our food, our water, our electronics are actually qualified to do so.
Okay, I'm starting to get it. But what do these amendments actually change?
Well, they're introducing a new accreditation levy that these testing and certification bodies will have to pay.
So they're charging the quality checkers a fee.
Essentially, it's meant to cover the cost of the accreditation process, the assessments, the oversight, all that.
But isn't there a risk that this levy will just get passed on to consumers in the form of higher prices for testing and certification?
That's a legitimate concern. And there's also the worry that this new fee could make it harder for smaller testing and certification bodies to operate, potentially stifling competition in that market.
So yet another example of how seemingly good intentions can have unintended consequences.
It is. And it highlights the need for careful consideration and analysis of these policies before they're implemented. We need to ask the tough questions, explore the potential downsides, and make sure that these changes are actually serving the best interests of the people they're intended to help.
Right, because it's easy to get caught up in the rhetoric and the promises, but we need to look beyond the surface and really understand the implications of these changes.
Exactly. And that's what we're trying to do here today, to equip you with the knowledge and the tools to critically analyze these policies and make informed decisions about your future.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here, but we're not done yet. There's one more topic I want to dive into before we wrap up this episode. Special economic zones, or SEZs as they're often called. We touched on them briefly earlier, but I think it's worth spending a little more time on this issue, considering its potential impact on the Kenyan economy.
I agree. SEZs are a hot topic, and these amendment bills propose some significant changes to how they're established and managed in Kenya.
All right, let's break it down. What are the key changes being proposed, and what could they mean for young Kenyans?
The main goal seems to be to streamline the process, making it easier for businesses to set up shop in these zones. They're also expanding the role of the Special Economic Zones Authority, giving them more power to grant permits and approvals.
So less red tape,
Hmm.
more centralized control.
That's the general idea. And they're introducing something called Special Economic Zone Service Permits, which seem to be designed to attract specific types of businesses.
Okay, this is where it gets interesting. What kind of businesses are they targeting?
Think about export-oriented manufacturing, logistics, and warehousing, and tech-based companies. These are all sectors that could benefit from the incentives offered in SEZs, and they align with Kenya's goal of diversifying the economy and creating higher-paying jobs.
So it's about attracting the kind of investments that will have a ripple effect throughout the economy, not just create isolated pockets of growth.
Exactly. But, and there's always a but, there are concerns. Some critics worry that these zones could create a two-tiered economy, with businesses inside the zones getting preferential treatment while those outside struggle to compete.
I see where they're coming from.
Yeah.
How do you ensure that the benefits of these zones actually spread to the wider economy and don't just concentrate in the hands of a few?
That's a key question. Transparency, accountability, and a focus on inclusivity are crucial. It's also important to make sure that the benefits trickle down to local communities through job creation, skills development, and infrastructure improvements.
It's about making sure everyone has a chance to share in the prosperity,
Yeah.
not just those who happen to be inside the zone.
Absolutely. And that brings us to another crucial aspect of these amendment bills: enhancing consumer protection in the financial sector.
Okay, let's talk about that. Yeah. What are the main changes being proposed, and how could they affect us as consumers?
One of the key aims is to increase transparency in the banking sector, making it easier for you to understand the fees and charges associated with your accounts, loans, and other financial products.
Transparency is always a good thing, right? No more hidden fees or confusing terms and conditions.
Exactly. And they're also introducing measures to protect your personal data. This is increasingly important as more and more of our financial transactions move online.
Data breaches are a real concern these days. It's good to see they're taking this issue seriously.
They are. And another major focus is strengthening the regulations around digital lending, which, as we discussed earlier, has become a major source of credit for young Kenyans.
This is a big one. What are the key changes they're proposing to protect borrowers?
The amendment bills are targeting those predatory lending practices we talked about. They want to cap interest rates, make loan disclosures clearer, and improve the dispute resolution process.
So basically making sure these digital lenders play by the rules and don't exploit borrowers.
Precisely. It's about preventing people from getting trapped in debt cycles that they can't escape.
It's reassuring to see that the government is recognizing the potential risks of digital lending and taking steps to mitigate them. But are there concerns that these regulations, while well-intentioned, could have unintended consequences?
That's always a possibility. Some experts argue that if the regulations become too restrictive, it could push digital lenders underground, creating a shadow banking system that's even harder to regulate.
So we're back to that balancing act again, aren't we? Protecting consumers without shutting down a sector that provides much-needed access to credit.
Exactly. It's a delicate balance, and one that will require careful consideration and ongoing monitoring.
I'm starting to realize that navigating these amendment bills is like walking through a minefield. Every step we take, there's a potential risk of unintended consequences, trade-offs, and unforeseen challenges.
That's a pretty accurate analogy, and that's why it's so important to have these conversations, to analyze these proposals from multiple angles, and to engage in informed discussions about the kind of economic future we want for Kenya.
Right, because these aren't just abstract policy debates happening in some ivory tower. These decisions have the potential to affect our lives, our livelihoods, and the future of our country.
Exactly. And remember, these are just proposed changes. They still need to be debated, scrutinized, and potentially amended before they become law. Your voice matters in this process.
So don't just sit back and wait to see what happens. Get involved, make your voices heard, and help shape the future of Kenya's economic landscape.
That's the key takeaway here. This is your future, and you have the power to shape it.
Well said. We've covered a lot of ground in this episode, but there's still more to discuss. Join us for the final part of our deep dive as we explore the broader implications of these trains. Business and tax laws amendment bills consider the potential long-term consequences and discuss what you can do to stay informed and engaged in this crucial debate. Welcome back to the deep dive. We've spent the last 2 episodes going through Kenya's business and tax laws amendment bills, really trying to understand what's in these things.
We've talked about the potential good, the bad, the trade-offs, those unintended consequences.
Now it's time to zoom out. Look at the big picture. What does this all mean for Kenya? For the future of the economy?
One thing that's clear is the government is getting more hands-on. They're not just relying on taxes anymore. They're using regulations to kind of steer things, shape markets, influence what consumers do, promote certain industries.
So let's take your money and more. We're calling the shots.
You could say that, and that has implications for everyone, especially young people who are starting their careers, building businesses, trying to make a difference.
Yeah. Right. Because if the government's setting the rules, we need to know those rules so we can actually play the game right.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to have these conversations, really analyze these policies, make your voices heard. Don't just assume the government knows what's best.
It's about taking ownership of our future right,
Yeah.
not just sitting back and watching things happen.
That's the idea. And it brings us to another important point. These amendment bills, if they become law, they'll have a long-term impact on how competitive Kenya is globally.
Okay. Oh, so.
Think about it. If all these regulations make it harder to do business here, it could actually scare away foreign investment.
So investors might go somewhere else where it's easier and cheaper.
Exactly. But on the other hand, if these regulations are done right, if they create a stable, predictable, transparent business environment, it could attract more investment.
So it's a gamble. It could go either way.
It could. And that's why the details are so important. How these regulations are written, how they're implemented, how they're enforced. That'll determine the impact.
So we need to pay attention. Hold the government accountable.
Absolutely. And that's where you come in, the young people of Kenya. You have a voice.
What can we actually do? How do we make a difference?
First, stay informed. Read the bills. Follow the news. Talk about these issues with each other. Second, make your voices heard. Contact your representatives. Go to public forums. Use social media.
So don't just complain on Twitter.
Yeah.
Actually do something about it.
Exactly. And third, think critically. Don't just believe everything the government says. Ask questions. Think about the impacts. What are the other options?
So be informed, be engaged, be critical thinkers.
Exactly. Because Kenya's economic future isn't set in stone. It's being shaped right now. And you can influence that.
I like that. We're not just passengers. We're in the driver's seat.
Yeah.
And we need to make sure we're going in the right direction.
Well said. And this isn't a one-time thing. Engaging in the economic and political life of Kenya, it has to be ongoing.
It's about staying informed, staying engaged, holding our leaders accountable, not just during elections, but all the time.
You got it. Because the decisions they make, the policies they put in place, they have a huge impact on your lives, your livelihoods, and the future of Kenya.
This has been an incredible deep dive. We went from feeling kind of overwhelmed and confused by these bills to feeling like we can actually do something.
That's what we were hoping for. We want you to feel empowered, believe that your voices matter, and that you can make a difference.
So to our listeners, thank you for joining us. Keep asking those questions, keep learning, and keep fighting for the future you want to see for Kenya.
Because Kenya's future is in your hands.